MLK, Brother Malcolm, it's remarkable that we find ourselves discussing these ideas once again after so long. I just listened to that interview and I must admit it stirred old memories of our struggle. The phrase, by any means necessary, came up and it reminded me of our past debates. I'd like to hear your thoughts now, after all these decades. Malcolm X, Dr. King, the world has changed, but the struggle for justice remains. When I first used the phrase, by any means necessary, it was born from the urgency and desperation of our people's suffering. We faced police brutality, lynchings, humiliation. Our dignity was constantly under siege. Back then, I meant that if the social order refused to grant us our rights, we'd have to claim them in any way we could. I know that troubled you because you feared it would justify violence. MLK, indeed I did. Your words resonated with the pain and the injustice we knew so well. Yet I always feared that resorting to violence, physical or otherwise, would taint the righteousness of our cause. If people saw our pursuit of freedom as destructive or terrorizing, we might lose essential supporters. Even worse, it could morally corrupt our own movement, turning us into what we fought against. Malcolm X, I remember that argument, and I must concede with hindsight that violence, even if it seemed like a tool at the time, could undermine the moral clarity of our message. When we say by any means necessary, the question is, what exactly do we mean by necessary? If we define necessary as that which genuinely leads us towards the goal of human dignity, equality, and understanding, then we must ask, is violence truly necessary, or is it just a temptation born of anger and despair? MLK, precisely necessary should mean that which is most effective, or as you might say, zielführend, leading us toward the goal. The ultimate goal is lasting justice and genuine brotherhood. Violence might shake the system for a moment, but it rarely reforms it. It may even give our oppressors an excuse to paint us as the threat, rather than the conscience of the nation. Malcolm X, then how do we maintain urgency and determination without lapsing into brutality? The people who suffer want immediate relief, not just poetic calls for patience. They want something tangible. When I said, by any means necessary, I wanted to convey that we wouldn't be passive victims. But perhaps I was too quick to assume that violence was a necessary step. Could there be another way? MLK, we saw a great example of another way in Gandhi's struggle against colonial rule. He refused to accept that violence was inevitable, and he put forth a moral force so powerful that it changed hearts as well as laws. Gandhi was influenced in turn by the teachings of a certain figure, a man whom Oscar Wilde described as the beautiful white Christ, an individual who highlighted cooperation and compassion as forces of nature, as essential as any competition. When I reflect on that lineage of thought, it becomes clear that we have always had alternatives to violence. Malcolm X, so what you're saying is that nonviolent action grounded in empathy is far from passive. It's a strategic and moral approach that leads toward lasting change? That our methods should never overshadow our aims, and that by choosing the right methods, we amplify our moral standing? MLK, yes, Malcolm. Nonviolence is active resistance, breaking unjust laws, accepting punishment without retaliation, holding the moral high ground. It demands sacrifices and tremendous courage. It forces the oppressor to see the victim as human, deserving of respect, not as a nameless threat. More than laws change, hearts change too. And when hearts change, it's harder for old injustices to slip back into place. Malcolm X, back in the day, I recognized the power of your words, but I still doubted that nonviolence could work quickly enough. Yet history has shown that strategies born of compassion can indeed reshape societies. Our legacy was one of tension, my call to be bold and unyielding, your insistence on moral clarity. But perhaps that tension was necessary to forge a balanced path forward. MLK, maybe so. Our methods didn't have to be identical to serve the same ultimate cause. And now, looking at a world still plagued by inequality and hatred, we might realize that the most necessary means are those that create lasting justice. We cannot afford to lose moral authority by choosing a path that is quick but cruel. The means we choose become part of the world we're building. Malcolm X, then the phrase, by any means necessary, should be understood not as a blank check for violence, but as a resolute insistence that we will not rest until justice is won. And we must choose those means that lead us there without compromising what we stand for. Maybe that's the interpretation that future generations can hold on to. MLK, yes, brother. Let them embrace determination without destruction and urgency without cruelty. That, I believe, would honor both your insistence on action and my insistence on peace. MLK. Reflecting further, Malcolm, one key element here is how we present ourselves to future generations. Our struggles weren't isolated incidents, they were chapters in a much longer story. People will look back and ask, did they choose the path that truly led to freedom and understanding? Or did they settle for short-term upheavals that left lasting scars? Malcolm X. That's true. Sometimes I wonder how our messages are interpreted today. Many still face oppression, discrimination, and a cruel indifference to their suffering. In such circumstances, people look for a rallying cry, something that asserts their right to resist. By any means necessary is powerful, but it can be misunderstood if not guided by moral clarity. When I think about what is truly necessary, I understand it now as what genuinely moves humanity forward, and that doesn't have to be violence. In fact, it often can't be. MLK, we must remember the figure Oscar Wilde called the beautiful white Christ, who highlighted the importance of cooperation, of helping each other rise, rather than tearing one another down. That influence passed through Gandhi, and then to me, showing that steadfast, compassionate resistance could shake empires without spilling blood. If young people realize this lineage of thought, they may see that our approach wasn't naive. It was strategic, sustainable, and morally consistent. Malcolm X. This moral lineage is crucial. Consider how often oppressors rely on portraying activists as dangerous threats. If a movement resorts to violence, it risks feeding that narrative. But if a movement responds to brutality with unwavering dignity, it forces the world to see the injustice clearly. Those who enforce the status quo can't hide behind claims of self-defense when their victims stand unarmed, holding out olive branches alongside their demands. MLK. Exactly. The world might be less forgiving if it perceives righteous causes as violent. We wanted to show that those who demanded respect and equality were not the aggressors, but the conscience of the time. Standing in nonviolent defiance deprives the oppressor of excuses. It compels observers at home and abroad to ask, why are these people being met with violence when they offer none? That question alone can unravel the tightest knots of prejudice. Malcolm X. So, our challenge was never simply to protest or resist. It was to protest and resist with such moral authority that no one could easily dismiss us. By clarifying that necessary does not mean reckless or vengeful, but rather aimed at achieving true justice, we guide people toward more constructive interpretations. It's a refinement of my older stance, one that doesn't lose the urgency but gains a deeper sense of purpose. MLK. Brother Malcolm, this evolution in understanding shows that our views were never static. They grew as we engaged with reality. The notion of turning the other cheek was not a surrender. It was a strategic confrontation that exposed the shallowness of violence. It's also about ensuring that once the battle is won, the peace that follows is real and not built on fear or resentment. Malcolm X. Yes, peace born of fear isn't peace at all. If violence had become our language, what would stop our successors from using that same language to settle their disputes, even when it's no longer necessary? We'd be planting seeds of destruction in the very field we hoped would bear fruit. Instead, if we show that courage, respect, and mutual aid are the real means to an end, truly necessary to transform society, then we pass on tools that can heal, not harm. MLK. And isn't that what future generations need most? Not just the memory of our battles, but the wisdom we gleaned from them. They must understand that words like necessary aren't open invitations to rage, but invitations to think more deeply about what leads to lasting change. If they see that we discuss these matters thoughtfully, they might approach their own struggles with greater care. Malcolm X. So the phrase could stand, but it must be understood within a broader moral context. By any means necessary should mean, by any truly constructive, life-affirming means that guide us toward liberation. It must exclude those actions that would betray the very values we're trying to uphold. MLK. Yes, and by doing so it becomes a vow to do whatever it takes to achieve justice, except losing our humanity along the way. That's how we respect those who came before us, those who sacrificed for this better world. We honor their memory by keeping our message pure, our methods righteous, and our vision clear. Malcolm X. Amen to that, Dr. King. May the future remember that we, in the face of cruelty, did not abandon morality. Instead, we redefined what was truly necessary to ensure that liberation meant not just a change of rulers, but a change of hearts. MLK. Let us consider what future generations face. The oppressions they tackle might not mirror ours exactly. Technology, globalization, environmental crises, and complex social dynamics will create new fronts. They will inherit a world where movements emerge online as well as in the streets. The question remains, how do they ensure their methods reflect the moral rigor we tried to uphold? Malcolm X, they must recognize that while tactics adapt, the core principles endure. Just as we debated the meaning of necessary, they must carefully define their terms. If they say by any means necessary, they must clarify what truly carries them toward dignity and justice. Is it organizing their communities to vote, to hold leaders accountable, to educate the youth? Is it building alliances across lines of race, faith, and nationality? These forms of action demand patience, strategy, and moral discipline. Violence is the simplest form of confrontation, but it's rarely the most profound. MLK. And let's be honest, Brother Malcolm, in this modern age where images travel instantly across borders, the moral character of a movement is scrutinized in real time. If activists descend into brutality, that single moment can overshadow years of careful work, turning public sympathy into suspicion. But if they remain steadfast in compassion and clarity, their message resonates widely, inspiring people who might otherwise remain silent. Malcolm X, that's the advantage of moral consistency. When confronted with injustice, if you respond with focused resolve, people see integrity. They see that your demands aren't selfish or tribal, they're universal. They apply not just to one oppressed group, but to anyone who might suffer under cruelty or indifference. That universal appeal is what strengthens a movement's foundation. MLK indeed, and universal appeal is a concept that transcends time. Think of how our words, once considered radical or controversial, have found acceptance in future generations. Today, people quote us in classrooms, at marches, and in policy debates. But we must ensure they don't merely quote us. They must understand the moral architecture behind our words. Malcolm X, true understanding involves seeing the interplay between goal and method. If a future movement aims to end systemic discrimination, for instance, it can't adopt methods that degrade human life or dignity. If it seeks equality and respect, it must not employ tactics that humiliate or endanger innocent people. The means shape the ends, molding not just what we achieve, but how we live within that achievement. MLK. That's what I try to convey in my lifetime. Love isn't weakness, it's strategic strength. Nonviolence, grounded in a deep empathy, can undermine oppressive structures more effectively than guns or bombs ever could. Because when hearts and minds shift, oppressive laws become hollow. When people refuse to uphold injustice, its pillars crumble. Malcolm X, and that's what I came to appreciate. Once I stepped back to see the bigger picture, I recognized that long-term change relies on people's willingness to rewrite their own stories. Violence can coerce, but it cannot inspire true transformation. It may force change, but only on the surface. Real change must be absorbed and chosen freely by the people themselves. MLK. Exactly. And so the phrase, by any means necessary, when interpreted through this lens, urges people to be relentless, resourceful, and resilient, but not ruthless. It challenges them to find the most uplifting means, not the most destructive. It becomes a call to ingenuity. Use words, music, education, solidarity, and even quiet, steadfast resistance to erode injustice. Malcolm X. And that ingenuity must be guided by an unwavering respect for human life. People are not pawns or tools, they are living souls with their own hopes and fears. If a movement betrays this principle, it risks becoming a new form of oppression rather than a cure for the old. MLK, we wanted freedom, not just for ourselves, but for our oppressors too, in a way, to free them from the moral rot of their own prejudice. A victor who wins by crushing another's humanity only lays the groundwork for future conflicts. But a movement that lifts all sides toward understanding and reconciliation creates the conditions for lasting peace. Malcolm X, in that sense, necessary, also means aimed at a stable, humane future. It's not enough to win a momentary advantage, we must lay the foundation for generations to come. We must consider the children who will read about our methods and aims. Will they be proud? Will they learn how to overcome their challenges with honor and empathy? If yes, then we've chosen well. MLK. That should be the test of our actions. Do they plant seeds of compassion or seeds of hatred? Do they build bridges or walls? The world we leave behind is shaped not just by the victories we achieve, but by the moral force we carry into those victories. Malcolm X, So if people today listen to that interview and hear echoes of our past debates, let them know this. We have grown wiser in death as we once tried to grow wiser in life. The meaning of by any means necessary must be understood as the pursuit of lasting, humane solutions. Let them adopt that perspective and go forth to build a world that's kinder, fairer, and ultimately free. MLK. Well said, brother. May future generations embrace the power of moral means, ensuring that justice not only prevails, but endures. MLK, Brother Malcolm, as we extend our thoughts even further, we must consider that many people today seek examples from the past but sometimes misunderstand the core principles. They might read a snippet of your words or mine and assume we advocated for something we did not. It's crucial that in this renewed understanding, our messages aren't reduced to slogans or taken out of context. Malcolm X. That's a real concern, Dr. King. Rapid communication and social media can spread partial truths in seconds. A phrase like, by any means necessary, can go viral without the deeper moral reasoning we've just explored. People might latch onto a militant soundbite and miss the nuanced reasoning behind it, miss the lesson that necessary means morally and strategically sound, not simply expedient. MLK, and that's why those who use our words must also embrace their responsibility to study, reflect, and think critically before applying our messages to new struggles. We never meant for anyone to pick up our banners without understanding the weight they carry. The path to justice requires deliberate thought as much as passion. Malcolm X. In today's world, this responsibility might even be heavier. Problems like climate change, economic inequality, and mass migrations due to conflict demand empathetic solutions. Violence, even now, could derail the credibility of movements that aim to protect human rights. If a movement claims to care for humanity, it must show the care in every step it takes. MLK. Yes, and with global interconnectedness, one violent act can have repercussions around the world. When a movement adopts nonviolent, morally grounded methods, it's more likely to gain international support. Alliances form more naturally, and solidarity emerges from recognizing shared values rather than shared fears. Malcolm X. And that international perspective might have guided us too, had we lived longer. We began focusing on issues not just of race, but of poverty, war, and international cooperation. The idea of working by any means that uplift all would fit perfectly into a global vision, one where every community learns from each other's struggles and solutions. MLK. Indeed. Consider how many human rights defenders look back at our era and try to find a template. It's not about copying tactics exactly, but rather understanding the guiding principles, dignity, empathy, clarity, and steadfastness. These are the tools that can be adapted to any time, any place, to uphold the universal rights of human beings. Malcolm X. This emphasis on moral means also sets a precedent. If oppressed groups prove that moral, compassionate action can move mountains, then the excuse of violence becomes less credible for everyone. We show that the so-called impossible can be achieved without harming innocence, and that sets a standard. Future oppressors and oppressed alike must contend with that legacy. MLK. Exactly. It's a heavy legacy, but also a hopeful one. It suggests that humanity can learn, evolve, and do better than before. If people understand that our debates weren't about winning arguments, but about defining the soul of a movement, they'll see that the heart of what we fought for was always about creating a more just and loving world. Malcolm X. And perhaps they'll realize that different voices in a movement, one more fiery, one more serene, can engage in constructive dialogue to refine their approach. Our differing perspectives back then helped shape a more mature understanding over time. Instead of splitting the cause, it strengthened it, because we confronted hard questions together. MLK. That's a powerful lesson. Differences need not be divisions. They can be sources of depth and resilience. Movements today often fracture over strategy, words, or tactics. But if they take a page from our renewed conversation, they might find that honest, respectful discourse leads to greater clarity. By refining what we mean by necessary, they refine their vision of justice itself. Malcolm X. This refined vision then serves as a beacon. Rather than rushing into actions that provide only temporary victories, activists can build movements that shape the moral narrative. When they say they fight for human rights, it won't be empty rhetoric. It will align with the methods they use and the future they aim to secure. MLK. And so, returning to the original phrase, by any means necessary becomes, by any means truly leading us toward the world we wish to see. A world where people live in dignity, free from fear, free from hatred. A world that doesn't justify injustice with the excuse of expediency. That's how the next generations can best honor both of us and everyone who struggled beside us. Malcolm X. Yes, Dr. King. May they carry that understanding forward, ensuring that every step on the path to justice is paved with integrity and love. Let these words be an echo, guiding them gently but firmly toward actions that uplift humankind rather than diminish it. MLK. Amen to that, brother.
A quiet room, old voices softly rise. Two spirits meeting long after their final day. MLK and Brother Malcolm, with so much left to say. They turn old words over by any means necessary. What do we mean by truth, and what is truly visionary? From pain and desperation, a phrase once took its form. A desperate people struggle in a world so cruel and worn. But now they ask each other, with wisdom shining through, how shall we shape our justice? What path leads us to what's true? Do we climb toward freedom on bridges made of love? Do we choose the gentle courage shining from above? Necessary now means moral strength, not fear or might. Together we rise in dignity, choosing compassion as our light. They recall the weight of struggle, the torches in the night. Gandhi's quiet courage, how it changed wrong into right. They speak of hearts and minds and a lineage of care, where love can bend the iron bars and clear the poisoned air. No longer just a slogan, no call to break or burn. They redefine the phrase to help all hearts discern. The means reflect the ending, a truth we must uphold. If we seek a better future, let it shine in actions bold. Do we climb toward freedom on bridges made of love? Do we choose the gentle courage shining from above? Necessary now means moral strength, not fear or might. Together we rise in dignity, choosing compassion as our light. They see a world connected, the battles yet to fight, but one that quick, unkind solutions never come out right. If future souls should hear their words, let them understand that justice blooms in patient fields sown by a caring hand. Do we climb toward freedom on bridges made of love? Do we choose the gentle courage shining from above? Necessary now means moral strength, not fear or might. Together we rise in dignity, choosing compassion as our light. We walk this road in harmony, no blades of hate, but seeds of empathy. In whispered wisdom, carried on the breeze, they guide us to a justice that frees. Oh yeah, oh yeah. In the quiet of a timeless space, old truths begin to flow. They rise from shadows of memory, voices reborn tonight. MLK MLK and Brother Malcolm seeking meaning in the light. By any means, they whisper, what does it truly mean? Is there more than angered urgency behind those words unseen? Years have shaped a wisdom, time has tested old beliefs. Once we stood at edges, torn by pain and disbelief. Now we trace the path of justice woven into love's embrace, redefining necessary through hope and gentle grace. Do we measure strength and kindness? Do we build with open hands? Will tomorrow's justice blossom when we heal this wounded land? If necessary means choosing what truly leads us home, we move beyond the violence, let compassion set the tone. They recall the distant struggle, broken chains and battle cries. Gandhi's steady courage rising high in tear-stained skies. A lineage of understanding sparks in Oscar Wilde's soft praise. A beautiful white Christ inspiring peaceful, brighter days. No, this isn't weakness, but a subtle, steady force, turning conflict into courage, taking empathy as course. If future souls remember, let them see how hearts can change. That by any means brings freedom when love is rearranged. Do we measure strength and kindness? Do we build with open hands? Will tomorrow's justice blossom when we heal this wounded land? If necessary means choosing what truly leads us home, we move beyond the violence, let compassion set the tone. In an age of global struggles where voices cross the seas, they say true change is nurtured not by guns, but planted seeds. If children read our stories, let them find a gentle guide, that human worth is lifted when our methods dignify. Do we measure strength and kindness? Do we build with open hands? Will tomorrow's justice blossom when we heal this wounded land? If necessary means choosing what truly leads us home, we leave behind the shadows, let compassion set the tone. Step by step we carry on.